with a social purpose through sport. So I've worked for Premier League clubs, which is more than small grants. That's billions of pounds being taken off the broadcasting rights for the Premier League and given back to the community, all the way through to working for London 2012, working for lots of kind of different sports providers in the UK. And then I was asked by, London 2012, I was asked by Boris Johnson to help set up his charity. So then I moved to Hong Kong. So my connection to Asia has been 8 years doing, like about 11, 12 years in the UK doing this. Then I moved to Hong Kong, set up the Laureus office in Hong Kong, did that job. And then more recently, I've moved to the Middle East, where I'm still playing a strategic advisory role for Laureus, but I've also set up my own business doing this for other corporates. So, you know, my focus for this presentation is definitely on the social end, but we'll talk a little bit about environment, we'll talk a little bit about governance, because they're all very much interlinked. But when I'm referring to sustainability, I'm very much talking about the people end and the social end and not the environmental end. Next slide, please, Ariel. Thanks. So we'll cover what is sustainability. We'll cover a little bit about what is social impact. We'll talk a little bit about how you then implement that into business. There's obviously a huge focus around the world on businesses doing this better and doing this more. And then I'll talk some real practical examples about sport and social impact. Next slide, please. So I'm going to start with a little story. Now, this is a short video. Don't play it yet, Ariel. It's actually quite long, so I think only play sort of the first. I'll ask you when to stop it, and it doesn't matter if the volume doesn't work because there's subtitles. But I want to talk to you about, is it going to work, Ariel? Video? Okay. I'll let you cool. Okay, let me just tell you the background story on Sonam. So this is for me, and I'll keep referring back to this over the next 30 minutes when we're talking, is Sonam was a girl born into an Indian family in the rural north part of India. She was the youngest sibling of 3 elder brothers. This is not a made-up story, and she's really happy for me to share this story. So, you know, I'm keeping everything pretty factual here. They had a small farm, a small holding that was mainly, that was their income, that was the way they lived their life. Sonam didn't go to school. She stayed at home to help in a traditional role in the home, helping mum cook, clean, look after her older brothers, etc. A huge drought hit India, followed by severe flooding. Their family lost their farm, they lost their livelihoods, and Sonam was put up for sale as the oldest girl. The family actually didn't manage to sell her to make money. They then migrated down to Delhi, to a slum called Simapuri, which is in the eastern part of Delhi. And Sonam started working as a garbage picker. It's a garbage picking community. Rubbish from the east parts of Delhi come to this community, and the women sit there and they take up the recycling, etc. She still didn't go to school, but she was lucky enough to meet neighbours who helped her read and write. And Laureus arrived. So this is maybe 3-4 years ago. There's been a lot of distrust in this community. Lots of people coming in, spending money and leaving, lots of government distrust. The slum has no electricity, no lighting, fairly overpopulated as slums go. And we arrived as Laureus with funding from a couple of corporates and a couple of UN organisations to try and integrate sport as a tool to re-educate the community, focusing on girls and women empowerment. And it was literally door knocking. So we go around, we knock on the doors, we try and build up trust, we run little football tournaments, and then we start to identify what is a real problem in this community, like where are the kind of main social issues. They included a lot of drugs and alcohol in the parks, in the 8 kind of small community parks. So there's nowhere for anyone to play sport. If the girls went into these parks, they were at risk of rape, they're at risk of abuse. So the first thing was to tidy up the parks, put CCTV in. So you may think, well, that's not sport, but actually we needed the spaces for the people to participate. So we clean up these communities, we clean up the parks, we start looking at water, sanitation, etc., just trying to create clean water through the communities to make it a healthier place to live, all combined with running football activities. And then that turns into providing coaching qualifications and bringing the community together to take ownership for this type of project. So it's not Laureates coming in and doing it, it is them taking ownership for themselves. So then we help form a community, we call them coalitions or steering groups of like key community members. In those community coalitions, you want to have the real anchors in those communities. So they include some of the more male-dominated figures, the fathers, who possibly may decide that working with women and girls isn't a good thing. And then we then train up the community to basically run these activities themselves. So we're 3 or 4 years in, and Sonam, if I've just told you her backstory, this, if you want to play the video, just maybe play the first 30 seconds. This is the transition of a girl who didn't read, didn't write. Thanks, Ariel. So as you can see, she is flourishing, and this is all due to sport. And this is one of millions and millions and millions of stories around the world, how sport is really changing young people's lives. Sonam has now set up 2 charities herself in that community. She's getting government funding. She's getting funding from Laureates as seed funding to basically develop that community. And when I sit down with these young people, and I often ask, you know, what do you want from life? They want to stay in their communities and they want to give back. Like moving to, you know, the Western world and getting a job in a bank and having money as they perceive money is not something they want to do. They want to stay in their communities and they want to give back. And so, you know, Sonam is an absolute kind of example of how sport has changed a young person's life. So I'll constantly come back to Sonam's story while we're talking to try and make most of the kind of the academic side of sustainability a bit more realistic, so you can kind of compare it to a real story. First question to all of you: how many of you know what SDGs are, Sustainable Development Goals? You'll have to speak because I don't have a microphone. I don't have chat, so you'll have to open your mic. Most of you, yes?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. So SDGs have come on a long journey. I think they originally were put into place formally by the UN in 2015, but it's actually in the early 90s that the Millennium Development Goals were created to actually try and reduce or eradicate poverty by 2015, and they just knew that target was never going to happen. So the SDGs were created as kind of 17 anchors, and very much when I talk about sustainability, I always refer to SDGs because they're the only thing out there that we can measure against. And there are lots of countries that still don't recognize SDGs. They don't talk about them. I'll be very honest, I've lived and worked in Hong Kong for 8 years. SDGs was nothing that the government ever talked about. It's actually only recently, since John Lee has come into post, as a new CEO, where they're actually now starting to talk about it. And that's more because the business community have really pushed and for the government to be talking more about SDGs. So they are the anchor. They're the thing that kind of holds everything down when we talk about sustainability. You can break them down into different brackets. When I'm talking social sustainability, we're talking very much the people pillar. So the eradicating poverty, the zero hunger focus, the mental health, the physical health, the sexual health, as we saw in Sonam's video, the increasing job opportunities, the gender equity side, the partnership side. The partnerships can sit across environment and social, but it's very much the kind of people pillar of what we're going to talk about. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the crossover between environment and social, they're part of SDGs. There's something we should all be measuring in our business world, in our day-to-day lives if we can. The impact on the environment very much impacts social impact. So when we were talking about Sonam earlier, we were talking about why she ended up having to be, well, potentially was put up for sale as a girl for the economy. But from an environmental perspective, that was because of the drought and then the flooding, which is caused by climate change. We know climate change is a disaster, but the impact that has on people is huge. So puts the people pillar of SDGs and the social impact side probably more important. We have to get the environment right. The environmental sustainability, in my view, gets a bit more press, a bit more publicity. It's a bit more talked about. And I think that is probably because it's easier to measure. Zero carbon, reducing fossil fuels, it's all much more measurable. How do you measure social impact? It's much more difficult. And there's a lot of work going on by various different bodies to try and help businesses and organizations and people to really measure social better. We're doing it really well in sport, and we're probably not selling ourselves enough in terms of the impact sport has on positive change for people's lives. And that's something I can help organizations do. And we'll talk a little bit about the monitoring and evaluating side in a minute. With environmental change, an increase in temperature, we see droughts, we see floods, we see communities displaced, we see an increase in migration. A typical town in Bangladesh at the moment, 400,000 people a year are moving. That's just one city around the world. 1/3 of the world's population now live in slums. That's not just slums as we perceive them to be in India or in Asia. That's townships in South Africa. That's favelas in South America. So 1/3 of the population are living in slums, and that's because of the pressure on people not being able to live rurally and having to move to the cities. So there's a constant movement of people putting more and more pressure on city living, and also an increase in water bulb temperature. So water bulb temperature, most of you, I think, live Asia, Singapore, so we know what humidity is like. As the temperature of the world goes up, it increases humidity. Now, we all sweat. This is a bit technical, but we all sweat. Our body can only survive under a certain temperature, right? So we sweat to reduce and cool our bodies. With water bulb temperature, that wet heat, which is part of climate change, the body cannot cool itself down quick enough. So therefore, it increases the body temperature to basic death. In slums, that is on the increase. More and more and more strokes, heart attacks are happening, much more in the middle to the older population. And in a few years' time, it will become a bigger killer than COVID. And nobody is talking about that. So there's the health issue we're seeing with environmental change. And then general, obviously, economic and social collapse. Sorry for the very depressing conversation, but this is the real side of sustainability. So climate change is an economic issue, a trade issue, a human rights issue, a health issue, a humanitarian issue. And it's very much becoming more and more of a topic of conversation in COP26, etc., etc. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'll whiz through some of this on SDGs, but we aren't progressing as fast as we need to. I think you can see from that slide, figure 1.1, we need another 32 years really and we haven't got that to try and hit that target by 2030. We are extremely behind. Zero hunger and good health and well-being is probably a bit more advanced in reducing inequalities, but life below water, so our oceans, ocean protection, land protection around sort of trees being deforestation, etc., etc. Consumption and production around that circular economy is very, very much behind, and so is economic growth. The interesting thing for me is strengthening partnerships, which is about people collaborating around sustainability. I personally see that actually as a real strength in most of the countries I've worked in, but it's still, according to the UN, way behind where it should be. So I think one thing as a takeaway from this is to just, whenever you're doing sustainability, is collaboration is absolutely key, and working with different organisations to help. Next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, so when we start talking about sustainability in business, you all familiar with Larry Fink, I'm sure, BlackRock CEO. It was him that really started in 2020 to put pressure on businesses to do good. Most of them didn't know how to do that. I think ESG was only starting to just become a real kind of topic of conversation in businesses. But every business, every organisation, whether you're an individual, whether you're an SME, or whether you're a multi-billion-pound corporate, has got a responsibility to do positive societal change. If businesses can do it and they spread that across their workforce, then we're more likely to reach that target of SDG 2030 much, much quicker. Next slide, please. So the social sustainability pillar in business is, that people end, but what people probably don't think about is the internal and external side of that. So in business, social sustainability, is the workforce, it's the human rights, it's the fair labour practices that happen in factories, like sports practices, sports factories across China is a really good example. Nike now, Adidas, all of the big sports agency organisations have got quality assurance in terms of the factories they work with and that fair labour. It's probably still got a lot more work to be done on it, but it's happening. It could be happening quicker, but it's there. Living conditions for those factory workers, or living conditions for people, working on sites, health and safety, wellness, mental and physical health. We all know that mental health issues are on the rise, and within the workplace, the majority of corporates I know are starting to address it. It's a very, very complicated subject, but most workplaces now have workplace mental well-being strategies in place. All of this is referred to as social sustainability. Diversity, equity and inclusion teams, departments around kind of more women on boards, more gender equity, more communities kind of supported within the workplace. Community engagement and volunteering. I'm pretty sure all of you will volunteer in some shape or form, or you have seen or heard within your organisations around community engagement and volunteering. Philanthropy, donating, funding. So it's that is social sustainability. It's not overcomplicated. It's happening within organisations and businesses. The challenge is measuring it. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Next slide, please. So before I start talking about sports end, I just want to ask you if you know what these. Oh no, go back. You're giving away my answers before I get a chance. So sustainability sits across various different functions, strategies, and teams, and it can often be led really personally. The board, the chairman, the CEO has a real passion for something. It could be education, it could be, the Cancer Trust, it could be anything. And that's how the strategy for sustainability is driven, because it's a personal, it's very emotive, it's very emotional. Most organisations now have an ESG strategy or a sustainability department, which is great, but it covers sponsorship and commercial, and Erica well knows this from all of the work that she's done in various different roles. It often comes within a sponsorship and commercial, transaction strategy or plan. There's a lot of PR that surrounds this work, showing that organizations are doing good. So it sits within the brands team, the communications team, the marketing team. It certainly sits within the human resource department around diversity, equity and inclusion is one, but often the kind of employee volunteering and philanthropy and client-led teams. So most, banking have got those teams where they're supporting the wealth management that goes into doing good, for example, with their clients. So quick round quiz. I'm going to, if you pop up the first bullet point, Ariel, CSR, don't click next. Someone tell me what they know what CSR means within a business. Doesn't matter if you get it wrong. CSR, anyone want to guess?
In the business?
I think.
Oh, I'll let me.
Yeah. From the little I know, I think is corporate social responsibility is
perfect. Well done. Yeah, exactly. So CSR is probably the oldest terminology you'll hear in a business for doing good. If you click the next button, Ariel. So CSR is a bit more of an internal function within a business. So it's where volunteering sits, employee volunteering. If a charity wants to seek support from a business, a sports charity, any charity, they would normally go to the person leading CSR, which is more often than not in the HR team. And it's the oldest, most traditional way that businesses show that they're doing good, basically. And it's kind of being pushed out a little bit. And I'll explain why in a minute. Next bullet point, Ariel. So DEI bracket B. Anyone know what that is?
Diversity, environment, inclusion, equity and inclusion.
Yeah. What do you know what the B is? A lot of US businesses are now adding B to this. Anyone want to guess?
Business.
No. Belonging. So a lot of US businesses have got a DEI and B strategy. So diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And that's to try and encourage more belonging within businesses. I mean, if you're inclusive and you're equitable and you're diverse, you're pretty much going to probably hit a, belonging anyway. But I tried to raise that in a couple of businesses I've worked in, and they just laughed and said we're not adding B. So it's not to everyone's liking. Thank you, Ariel. Next one. So ESG. Anyone want to guess what that is? This is the easiest one.
Environmental, social governance.
Yes, well done, thank you. So this has been happening since really the 60s around socially responsible investing. But I think it's the early 2000s when ESG became a real kind of core anchor in many businesses. And now most parts of the world, it's now like in Hong Kong, for example, if you're on the stock exchange, you have to have an ESG strategy and you have to report against it every year. So it's now becoming in some ways a great thing for sustainability as a whole, but often most businesses will only focus on the E and the G. So they'll focus on their environmental targets, they'll focus on their governance, which is where diversity, equity and inclusion sits, and they don't focus on the S. And that's not because they probably don't care. It's just because it's difficult to measure and people don't understand it enough. And also ESG strategies can be quite long. And not, they're not something you would want to pick off a shelf and read, I don't think. So they're not fun, I don't believe. The last one is CSV. This is probably the one that doesn't get them much press, and maybe you don't know what it is, but does anyone want to take a guess what CSV means?
Corporate social and volunteering.
Good guess, but no. Anyone? So it's corporate shared value. If you click to the next slide, Ariel, and then the one after that, can you click along? Next one. So corporate shared value is where we start to look at profit and purpose within a business. So purpose is a full cycle, and it's making sure businesses, if they embed purpose first and focus on that, they'll get the profit. You know, businesses now are being asked a lot by especially the younger population in interviews, you know, what are you doing for the planet? What are you doing for people? Where is your purpose? And they're choosing the businesses they work for, or they're choosing the products that they buy off the shelf because of this purpose element. So there is you know, it crosses brands, it crosses communication. But it's very much, it needs to be embedded across the whole business. And there's a whole industry created around shared value. And in Hong Kong, there's a shared value initiative organization, which corporates can sign up to. It's amazing. It really helps grassroots organizations, but it also really elevates what big brands like AXA is one, HSBC are doing around this kind of purpose place. It helps address the culture within your business and your organization. It can create more innovation, because if you build purpose in, you're listening to your workforce from the bottom to the top, then it can become much more innovative. You create much more loyal customers, and all of that ultimately equals more profit, right? If you are showing that you've got purpose in your brand, people are more likely to spend money with you, and therefore obviously you make more money. So it's not something that's talked about a lot, especially in Asia, but it's something that's definitely growing. Next slide, please. So bringing this all back to sport, and I'll talk about, I think Erica I don't know if Erica's still on the call, but she mentioned it earlier, because Standard Chartered are actually going for this award. So 2.5, 3 years ago, Laureus Sport for Good realised that there's a lot of brands, next slide, Ariel, that one. Realise that there's a lot of organisations out there doing good, but nobody's really talking about it and celebrating it or comparing each other. So we created the Sport for Good Index with Sports Pro to shine a light on brands that are really doing positive things around environment and social impact in the sports industry. So the majority of them are sports brands. If they're not sports brands, they're giving back to sport. It looks at how brands particularly might be innovative, what impact they're having, their commitment to this. It's not, you know, they're not just doing it 1 year and then ticking a box and leaving. It's long-term strategic investment into sports, into environmental and social sustainability. It's got commercial viability to it, but it's measured against SDGs, whether that's the people element or the planet element. And it calls brands out. So we actually have a judging panel. People apply for this. You can go onto the website, you fill out, or you fill out the application form, and that goes to a judging panel. And then the 50 brands are announced at a big ceremony with our ambassadors. Sometimes in London, we did 2 last year. We did 1 in London, 1 in New York. And yeah, the first year we did it, we didn't know how it's going to go, but now more and more and more brands want to get put on this list, which is amazing. And if you click along, I'll just give you 2 examples of the brands that we've pulled out. Patagonia have won it every year so far. I think you probably all know how good Patagonia are in terms of the impact they have on the world. But in 2022, they became a charity as an organisation. They're investing hundreds of millions back into sustainability. Rexona is a really interesting one in that it launched, it did a huge piece of research in the US around how young people just weren't being included in exercise. They didn't know how to move. They were just uneducated on the importance of physical activity. So they brought Laureus Beyond Sport together, and we funded 43 sports organisations to basically try and reach the real disadvantaged youth in some of the most underserved communities. That actually has gone on year now. It's working. We're working in Australia and New Zealand and Colombia, and it's got a big girls focus now around body image. You know, girls using social media, comparing themselves to others, and how that is creating a negative sort of confidence level in body image. So we are running these 6 weekly courses through girls' sports organisations. Netball is a really good example in the UK. So they do netball and then they learn about using social media to build up their confidence rather than not their confidence. And it's had some amazing outcomes. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm going to finish off like whizzing through some of this, so I'm really conscious of time. Sport and social impact. So this is some examples of the work that I've been working on with Laureus over the last several years in various different organisations. If you click along, Ariel, please. So looking at, we focus on 6 SDGs only as an organisation. We don't try and cover all of them. We want to focus small and measure success, and we've been doing that since Nelson Mandela founded us back in 2000. So this is just one example of an SDG. So we need to identify the problem, right? The cause. What is the problem that we're trying to address? When we talk about sport for peace, we're looking at that 1 million displaced every year. I talked about it right at the beginning of the presentation, the movement of people, the migration of people moving to cities, people being displaced due to war. So when the Ukraine and the Russia war kicked off, we created the Sport for Peace and Humanitarian Fund. If you click along the next slide, please. And we tried to identify 2 objectives. So we knew millions of people will be displaced. So what can we do to affect positive change? The first thing was supporting communities to recover from the disaster and the shock through sport. And the second was to support refugees and host communities towards social cohesion. When people migrate very quickly, you've got lots of different communities that are suddenly forced to be put together, and that can create social divide in itself, especially in refugee camps. And sport is a natural social cohesion tool. You put different communities on a football pitch, they'll be playing football, they won't be talking about their differences. We all know that, that's common sense because we live and work in this world. So that's, you know, in refugee camps, when you've got millions being displaced very, very quickly, sport can actually be a real peacemaking tool. So we find the funding from different organisations, and then we grant fund the organisations in those communities doing this work. We're measuring and reporting impact. We're trying to build research across all of this so we can influence more change, scale the work that we're doing, and also influence stakeholders positively. Next slide, please. And this is just a couple of examples of the programmes that we've been working with around the Peace and Humanitarian Fund. I love Team Up in Poland and Moldova. That's Andrei Shevchenko. Obviously, you all know him, a Ukrainian football star. He's been an absolute force for good when it comes to our Sport and Humanitarian Fund. He's advocated for it like globally and allowed us to raise a lot of funding to give back to these organisations. And Wall Child is an organisation that does play with displaced young people in refugee camps, and just basically does multi-sport and play, but allows them to identify their feelings of depression, stress, reduced happiness, like to really understand their feelings, and then implements methods that they can use to try and help them build more confidence and increase their happiness, etc., but all done through sport and play. It's an amazing organisation. Generations for Peace, many of you may have heard of. They're a pretty big organisation. Working with them on the borders in Syria, Jordan, etc. So that's a good example of SDGs and how we're measuring it, and how, you know, sport is obviously a peacemaking tool. The other couple of things to touch on is the impact that actually athletes have on social sustainability and social impact through sport. We work with 300 plus athletes around the world. Not all of them have their own foundations, many do. We run Rafael Nadal's foundation in Spain, for example, for him. But Naomi Osaka came to us back in 2018, 2019 with her main sponsor, Nike, and said, she wants to make a difference. She wants to give back. How can you help? So her 3 kind of countries that we're most passionate about, where she's been born and raised, family, heritage, etc., is Haiti, Los Angeles, and Tokyo. And we've created something called Play Academy with Naomi, which is now funding, I think, 16 organisations in those countries. A lot of our sponsors are now investing into that project. It's got a long-term strategic plan. One of the girls that played in the Haiti team for the World Cup was actually from this program. It's not set up to identify talent. It's there to reduce discrimination and disadvantage. But if we get, you know, the next World Cup footballer from it, then amazing. Naomi does just some amazing work. When she had her mental health breakdown, but I think it was 2022, 23, or maybe 21, 22, I can't remember. All the funding, all the money that she actually raised from that through different, like Calm, for example, she invested back into Laureus and into this program. She's not doing it for a PR exercise. She's doing it because she cares. And I think that's really important. But we are measuring success of that project and, you know, allowing her to know that she's doing good. Every time she hits the ball, every time she has a good day or a bad day, she's doing good. And there are more and more and more athletes out there doing that, which is amazing. And you can click on the video and see it. And there's obviously a website as well. I'm not going to talk about Sport for Good Cities, so Ariel, just keep clicking on. The last thing I just want to finish on is this whole measuring impact. I think it might have been Claire that said in one of her presentations, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And this, yeah, and that absolutely applies to social sustainability. If you're really thinking about how do I do good in my organization, I would suggest select the couple of SDGs. They are your anchor. If you don't go back to SDGs, it's really difficult to measure success. And the UN have done all the hard work for you. They have created the SDG, or the social focus area. They've created the objective, and they've also created the impact indicator for you. This is something we have set up for all of our 300 plus organizations we work with around the world. So we have got benchmarks. We've been measuring against this particular framework that I'm showing you now since 2018. So we can show distance traveled, we can show, you know, really show the impact of the work that we're doing. If you're thinking about implementing this into your business, use a measuring impact framework. You can go onto the SDGs, you can pull out the indicators, and then you can measure against them, or come to me or go to Laureus, or there's various different social impact organizations out there that can help you do this work. But if you're starting afresh, don't recreate the wheel. Use the SDGs to measure your success. Does someone have a question then? No? Okay. Well, I think that's it, Ariel. Just keep clicking along. I'll just check what else is on there. Oh, so this is a really good example. I'll go back one, sorry. This is a good example of I've just shared the 6 SDGs, but this is one really broken down. So from when we're talking about peace building, so our objectives are, I've already talked about them because we talked about them earlier, but how do we then measure that? So the number of children and young people who report feeling safe in their communities as a result of being part of a Sport for Good program. The number of young people who've reported having a supportive relationship with a coach, a mentor, you know, somebody through a Laureus Sport for Good program. That's how that's our kind of our measuring our success. And then the KPIs, number of organizations that are delivering this work about reducing violence and crime, and the number of organizations receiving funding from us as well. So we always want to see this increase year on year, and we've been measuring against only these for the last 5 years. We never changed them. So it's really easy for us to track success. Different variables will come in, and we might add different KPIs depending on the funding, but we always, non-negotiable, when you get funding from Laureus, you will always have to measure against these specific ones. If you're working against a SDG of peace building, you might be working against the mental health one or whatever, and you always have to work against 2. So a primary and a secondary SDG goal. Last slide is, I think, just how you would go about doing this in your own day-to-day life or in your own business. So it's pretty simple. Think about what difference you want to make. Look at the SDGs, set yourself some goals, start working with the right people, and Laureus or anyone can help you connect to those right people. And a lot of these presentations have been about connecting to people. So find the people in your network to help. find the right stakeholders and partners to help you deliver the work, and then measure. Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. I think it's a lot of very good content, and I love the stories, Rexona and Patagonia, and even I read a bit about Naomi Osaka, and it's lovely. But the most thing I learned about is that everything that we do must be measured, and the SDG is the framework that anybody that's serious about social impact and sport should use. Yeah, so thank you so much.